Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the final lecture in our series on the theology of Rabbi Sacks, or as kind of Jewish theology for modern times, as inspired by Rabbi Sacks's teachings, or Rabbi Sacks' blessed memory. It's been a wonderful studying with all of you. I know I've learned a lot in preparing these classes, and have found that it's really helped me to, I think, appreciate even more exactly what Rabbi Sacks was attempting to do within his worldview and the way that he built off of tradition, but perhaps formulated some ideas in a bit more of a modern tongue and perhaps extended things a bit further than they had been understood previous to him. And that fundamentally created a worldview that would make Judaism of interest and meaningful and inspiring for a generation of Jews who perhaps had not grown up with a strong Jewish background. And no doubt, Rabbi Sacks' own upbringing, being brought up someone who, fully identified as a Jewish person, but embraced his Jewish observance, more during his university years, right? He had a particular insight into the dynamics of somebody kind of coming from kind of outside the fully observant religious life, and choosing it, and what he saw in it that inspired him and that he thought was so important about Judaism, that it had something to say to Jews and non-Jews alike, and that really allowed him to find such a powerful voice, again, both within and beyond the Jewish community. And in that way really has, I think, made Judaism or enabled Judaism to be so important in people's lives, even those who do not grow up with it themselves, who maybe kind of just go with the flow or kind of take it for granted. But he really has shown why it's something which is so vital and so important. And so we've looked at this in a number of different topics, about issues of faith more broadly, integration of science and religion, the major theological questions of bad things, why bad things happen, and of course, the question of, what is the role of Jewish people within the world when one accepts not a religious superiority, but this idea of difference and the dignity of difference. And so some really the themes that have come out. And if you look at Rabbi Sacks's writings over the past 20, 30 years, you can really see that some of these ideas have been there from the beginning, and he's obviously improved his formulation and kind of teased it out and kind of shown how they are relevant and manifest in a variety of different areas. And he's really taken it more and more forward as it went. And obviously throughout all of his career, he was really doing two things. He was giving voice to the world about Jewish ideas that he thought that Jews possessed, that the world needed to hear, as well as, of course, helping Jews to better appreciate their own Judaism. Of course, those were often through the same thing, right? By showing that Judaism had something to give to the world, made Jews proud of what they already had. But while, of course, within the broader world, he's talking about maybe just the ideas within Judaism, he was obviously then also interested in understanding, a bit more where those ideas come from within the Jewish tradition. What does the Jewish tradition have to tell me as a Jewish person? And certainly an idea that he expressed was that, a person should always be more Jewish, not less. And amazing how you can have someone who is a theologian also be such an inspiring figure. Often we think of those as kind of two different kinds of people, but he really used his understanding of philosophy and theology in a way to really motivate people and inspire people and to help people to recommit. And so what I'd like to do in tonight's class is to really look at how Rabbi Sacks related to mitzvot, to Torah, to the laws of our tradition. If you read Rabbi Sacks's writings, and he doesn't spend a lot of time on, halakha, on mitzvot, of kind of language of, we have to do this, we have to do that. Most of his writings are really focused more on ideas, lessons, kind of big picture type things, but not really on the details of Torah. One could almost be led to the conclusion that maybe these things were not top of mind to Rabbi Sacks, though of course he was chief rabbi. He lived a observant Jewish life. And so what I'd like to do is, in this class, is to kind of try to understand a bit more, a bit of conjecture. So, I'm not necessarily saying this is exactly what Rabbi Sacks thought, but perhaps from some things he did write about these topics and some other Jewish sources, to try to understand a little bit, what was the role that mitzvot play within a person's Jewish life. And we'll see that there are some quite stark differences in how Jews, even deeply traditional Jews, have to this question. And it ultimately impacts quite a lot their relationship to their Judaism and to what mitzvot ultimately mean to them. Okay? And so that's just very kind of general. As we kind of get into some of the sources, we'll be able to tease out, I think, a bit more what exactly I'm trying to get at with this question. And so we're going to start with the first source, and we'll begin this topic. So I'm going to play the. Here we go. Okay. So over here, we're going to start with this source from the Shulchan Aruch. This is, of course, written by Rav Yosef Karo, who is was the great halachic authority of Sephardic Jewry. Rav Yosef Karo was born just before the Spanish expulsion. I believe he was born in 1488. So he's just a few years old at the time of the expulsion. His family left, ended up settling in the Ottoman Empire, and he lived therefore originally kind of in that area, and then as the Ottoman Empire expanded, eventually he ends up living in Tzfat. And he writes the Shulchan Aruch, which is the great legal code, which even till this day is really the dominant legal code. While obviously there's been further questions and topics and subjects in the past 500 years, the Shulchan Aruch really, though, kind of laid the groundwork for kind of the bulk of Jewish practice. And so even till this day really is the preeminent legal code. If not the final word, certainly often the kind of the framework that we use for thinking about halakhic issues. And over here, he's talking about something which is kind of a general principle, which relates to the topic of mitzvot. And he writes the following. He says, Yesh omrim, some say, she'ein mitzvot tzarichot kavana, that mitzvot, right, commandments, do not require intention. V'yesh omrim, and there are those who say, she'tzarichot kavana, latzet be'asiyat ota mitzvah. And there are those who say that it requires intention in order for one to fulfill the mitzvah through their action. V'chein halakha, and that is the law. And so here he is addressing the question of, what if a person does a mitzvah, but does not have intent when performing the mitzvah to be fulfilling a mitzvah? And so what if, for example, a person picks up a a branch of a palm tree that happens to have connected to it a hadas and arava, right, a myrtle and a willow, and at the same time also picks up a citron, simply because there's something underneath it that he wants to get to, and he picks it up and puts it back down. So he's done the act of the mitzvah, which is lifting the four species together on Sukkot, but he didn't do so with the intent to do the mitzvah. So one opinion says, as long as you do the act of a mitzvah, even if you don't have intent to do a mitzvah, you still fulfilled your obligation. And the other opinion says that no, if you have to have intent that you're doing mitzvah in order to fulfill the performance of that mitzvah. And this is a debate among the Rishonim, among the medieval rabbis. And Rav Yosef Karo rules according to the dominant view, which is it's the latter. You have to have intent of doing mitzvah. If you do something by accident, then that is not enough. You have to have intent. Now, this halakha has to do with the notion of intent to do a mitzvah. Now, if a person doesn't understand the mitzvah, if a person doesn't have kind of added meaning with the mitzvah, that's not what this is talking about. This is simply the idea of I am doing this willfully, right? I'm doing this with intent, right? And the halakha is that you need to do with intent in order to fulfill it. But it's not necessarily saying more than that. But it is saying that one does need to be doing an action with presence of mind, right? One needs to be present within the things that they do. Now, there are certain mitzvot where you need to actually have even additional kavanah, additional intent. It's not just enough to know you're doing a mitzvah. You have to have intent about the mitzvah. One of the classic examples of this is the Amidah. When a person says the first paragraph of the Amidah, one has to actually imagine themselves as standing in front of God. If one just spaces out as they're doing it, even though you had intent to do the mitzvah, that's not enough. You really have to imagine you are speaking directly to God in that moment. They say with Shema, you have to actually be thinking about what the words mean. To simply say the words isn't enough. But for most mitzvot, you don't necessarily have to have in mind the deeper meaning, but you do have to in mind that you're doing a mitzvah. Okay. So the question is, ultimately, is what to then make of this, right? What to make of this idea of what should one have in mind when doing a mitzvah, or what is the ideal when doing a mitzvah? And when it comes to this point, there definitely is a divergence in views. So I would say one classic view, and certainly if you think of this in a more mystical, Kabbalistic tradition, the idea is that when you do a mitzvah, you have in mind that you are fulfilling the will of God, right? And that is the objective, right? The objective is that this is what God has commanded me to do, and I am doing what God has commanded. Whether I have any deeper understanding of the meaning of this mitzvah is besides the point, right? The main intent one has to do is that I am doing the mitzvah. If you take it again in a more mystical sense, they have the idea that when you're doing this mitzvah, that you are doing something, some kind of cosmic significance when you fulfill this mitzvah, simply by performing the mitzvah, maybe through the awareness that you're doing a mitzvah, that somehow impacts the cosmos, impacts the world around you, but you are doing something quite significant through the very act of doing the mitzvah. Now, of course, this attitude creates a great sense of passion, right, with the observance of the mitzvah, because there is a sense that through the very act of doing the mitzvah, one is doing something of significance, right? Something which is important, either because you are doing the will of God or because you are somehow perfecting the universe, or you'll hear some people say, they'll teach us school children, with every mitzvah that you do, you're adding another brick to the Beit HaMikdash, to the temple, which is in heaven. And when the temple in heaven is finally completely built through the performance of all these mitzvot, it will descend back to the earth, right? And every mitzvah you do is adding another brick to that temple. It's not an idea which one wouldn't have heard, right? That's kind of become kind of more popular way of thinking about things. But that fundamentally, the focus is on the mitzvah. The focus is on the mitzvah. What we're going to see is that this is not the position that Rambam adopted. And as you might guess, not the view that Rabbi Sacks had. And when we get to the end of today's presentation, we'll reflect on kind of what is some of the significance of thinking about things differently. So let me show you what Rambam says about this issue about meaning within mitzvot. Okay. And here Rambam says the following. It's a lot of text, so I apologize. I'd like to call on somebody to read, but I'll need you to read slowly, and please pause when I ask you to do so. Would somebody like to volunteer to do that? Great, thank you, David. So I'll just start. So thank you, David. So this is from Rambam's Guide to the Perplexed, Mor Nevuchim. There's 3 volumes. This is volume 3, section 31.
Okay, my Maimonides, More Nevuchim 331. There is a group of human beings who consider it a grievous thing that causes should be given for any law. What would please them most is that the intellect would not find a meaning for the commandments and prohibitions.
Right, so let's pause there. So why do they not want to find reasons for the mitzvot? Why would they rather say, we have no idea why this law was commanded?
Well, because if you have a reason for it, you might say, well, I don't agree with it. I don't want to do it, like Shlomo HaMelech. When Hashem gave us reasons, the 2 of the mitzvot in the Torah, even Shlomo HaMelech, the wisest of people, he transgressed them.
Right.
So sometimes it's good not to have a meaning, to have like faith.
Right. So that's part of the explanation, right? Is that right? You might then become too smart for the Torah. But and in fact, the Talmud has a discussion. The Torah specifically didn't give reasons so that we would not err with them.
Yeah.
But this seems to be referring to even something more than that, which is to say that if something has a rationale, then there's nothing supernatural about it. And almost in order for a mitzvah to have more meaning, it almost needs to have no rationale, because then that enables a person to say it must have some, metaphysical significance. Obviously there's got to be some reason God commanded this law, and the fact that it doesn't have any reason that I can grasp must mean that it has some more some deeply significant reason that kind of goes even beyond into the cosmos, right? And so some people don't want to give any rationale to the mitzvot. All right.
Is that like the red cow? That we just don't understand the reason for the red.
Well, correct, right? And so the question is, you could ask, what's going on with the red cow, right? Is it that we simply have to figure out what's going on, or do you say it's beyond us? There's some kind of cosmic thing. So if you can say that that's actually true about all the mitzvot, then oh my God, every mitzvah I do, it's oh my gosh, it's doing these amazing things. And maybe that makes somebody really passionate about it. But if it's, you don't do this because you don't want to make that person feel bad, and you do this, then for some people, right, that makes it less otherworldly, and perhaps less, feel less significant, right? So let's see what the Rambam thinks about that approach. If you carry on.
Okay. What compels them to feel thus is a sickness that they find in their souls.
So he's not a fan. Right.
For they think that if those laws were useful in this existence and had been given to us for this or that reason, it would be as if they derived from the reflection and the understanding of some intelligent being. If, however, there is a thing for which the intellect could not find any meaning at all, and that does not lead to something useful, it undoubtedly derives from God. Indubitably derives from God. For the reflection of man would not lead to such a thing. It is as if, according to these people of weak intellects, man were more perfect than his maker. For man speaks and acts in a manner that leads to some intended end, whereas the deity does not act thus, but commands. Oops.
Sorry.
I don't know it off by heart.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
There we are.
Sorry.
For man speaks and acts in a manner that leads to some intended end, whereas the deity does not act thus, but commands us to do things that are not useful to us, and forbids us to do things that are not harmful to us.
Right. So thank you, David. So, Rambam makes it very clear here that he thinks, some people think it makes the mitzvot less significant to give, a reasonable explanation for them, right? And that they're somehow more significant if they are illogical. So Rambam says that's ridiculous, right? To say that God commanded us to do things that don't have like a logic to them, makes God like bizarre. And in fact, mitzvot are so much more meaningful if there's a rationale for them, and that we say God commanded us to do this because it's good and because it makes sense and because it's the right thing, to be. And the fact that it is reasonable to us doesn't make it less significant. It makes it more significant, right? That makes it something that we can learn something from, something that can inspire us, something that can impact us, and that's something which is vital. And so Rambam would say that even if one were to claim that when one does a mitzvah, one only has to have in mind that they are doing a mitzvah, that is not to say that there isn't more to have in mind, right? That there isn't meaning that goes beyond the fact that I'm simply doing a mitzvah. It's just that I still fulfill my obligation even if I don't have that other meaning. But that there is additional meaning for a person to have in mind when doing these mitzvot. And I think that's really important because it really starts to kind of set an attitude about the relationship to mitzvot and their purpose for us, right? That their purpose isn't some otherworldly function, but their purpose is in this world. There's something that I can understand why they were commanded and what the purpose of these laws are. And so what I'd like to do, go ahead.
Ask you, is it right to introduce into the discussion the fact that some mitzvot are mina Torah and some are from the rabbis only? And I'm not quite sure what the proportion is.
So yes, listen, obviously that's a good question. You would expect anything which is rabbinic in origin absolutely should have a rationale to it. Meaning if the rabbis are saying, this is what you should do, right? Obviously they had a reason for doing it, right? But this is going ahead and saying, it's only the rabbis, right? Meaning the Torah itself has a reason for doing it. It's a book that makes sense, right? That there has to be a reason why God commanded us to do things. And God wants us to understand to do these things. Now, in terms of David's question of aren't there some mitzvot that we don't understand, we'll get to that question. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you a video from Rabbi Sacks where we see kind of how he formulates this. Okay, so let's just take a look over here. I'm going to change my screen share. And this video is from a series that he had done a number of years ago, where people kind of sent in questions to him from all over the world. Well, you'll see this one. This was I thought this was a nice one where he talks about some of these issues. It's a bit of a longer video, so it's enjoy it. Here we go.
Hello, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. I'm Jared Kabor. This is Adam Silver and Sam Maisner. We are from Carmel School in Perth, Australia, and we're wishing you a Shana Tova and Happy New Year. And may this year ahead be a sweet and fruitful year. And this is our question.
Okay, Rabbi, so our question is, if we were to only follow commandments that give us meaning and that we see the purpose in, that we pick and choose from what God gave us, does that mean that we are excluding God from our Judaism?
Well, hi there, Jared, Adam, and Sam in both Australia, which is the most beautiful city imaginable, and of course a lovely Jewish community. And it's a long way from anywhere else, actually, but I love this city and I love the Jewish community, so it's great to hear from you. And Sam, you have a good question. If you keep a command because you understand the reason, are you sort of putting our needs first and not really thinking about God? Well, truth is, I think trying to understand the reasons for the commands is actually trying to understand what God wants from us. You know, for instance, take a simple command, not eating meat and milk together, or, you know, now there are deep symbolic reasons for this. But I want to mention another reason which has only just come to light. There's a fascinating social scientist called Walter Mischel, who coined, as you know, you probably heard about this, it's called the marshmallow test. 50 years ago, he devised this test for 4-year-old kids. He put a 4-year-old kid in a room and there was a marshmallow on the table, and he said to the kid, look, I'm just going off for 20 minutes. You can either eat the marshmallow now, or if you wait for 20 minutes and you don't eat it, you can have 2 marshmallows. And it was just fascinating. Without the kids knowing this, they were being filmed, and it's fascinating watching these 4-year-old children wrestling with the issue of self-control. Now, it turns out that what makes this test so fascinating is that the kids' score on this ability of self-control predicted pretty much the rest of their lives. The kids who were able to wait for 20 minutes to control themselves, who got the extra marshmallow, did better at school, better at university, better in their careers. So it turns out that self-control from a very early age is a very powerful thing. Now, if you can't eat milk for 6 hours or 3 hours or whatever you keep after eating meat, you are from a very young age learning a habit of self-control. Now, doing that and understanding that is one of the reasons behind the dietary laws, by no means the only one, but one of them. Are you excluding God from your calculations? No, you're actually trying to fathom the will of God. God wants us to exercise self-control because human beings do very bad things indeed when they lack self-control. So Maimonides' view, and I'm giving you Maimonides' view, is that the more you understand the reasons for the commands, the more you will do them and benefit from them, because you will see how they're changing you in ways that God wants you to change. So there's nothing secularizing or marginalizing God about doing commands for the reasons we understand. The only thing that's terribly dangerous is not to keep the commands we don't understand. Because believe you me, there are in any given age certain commands that just don't seem to make sense in terms of the values of the age. but they turn out one age later to be very important indeed. Like, whoever heard of environmentalism before 1947, when Rachel Carson did Silent Spring? Nobody ever heard of this before. But all of a sudden you begin to realize how many of the commands in the Torah, like leaving fields fallow 1 year in 7 and so on, are there to protect the environment. Don't take the mother bird and its child together. Don't take an animal and its young in one day, because that threatens the entire continuity of the species. And do you know how many species became extinct because human beings didn't exercise that self-control? Now, people didn't understand this, and the end result was, pretty vast tracts of ground like African deserts became deserts because people overfarmed the land. So there is a reason for all the commands. Not all of it is clear to us at any given moment, but don't think that doing them for a reason is in any way in conflict with doing them because God said so. God said so for that very reason, that we should understand the inner logic of the commands. Hope that helps. And in the meantime, Shana Tova.
Okay, so let's stop that share. So here you have, Rabbi Sacks really just stating it quite emphatically, right? That we should, absolutely think about why we perform the mitzvot that we do. We should not do mitzvot just kind of almost as ends within themselves, but as a means, right, to something beyond it, right, to somehow gain some further reason or impact or function through the performance of that mitzvah. And as we saw, that's very much in line with Rambam's thinking, right, where he says that there are rationale, there are reasons for the mitzvot, and that we obviously should attempt to understand those reasons for why we do things. And as we'll see, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, Rabbi Sacks' whole thing is that to make life meaningful, right? That to find meaning in one's Judaism, right? That we don't do it by rote, that we're not just automatons, that we don't just kind of have this mechanical Judaism, but in fact, Judaism teaches us so much. But what Rabbi Sacks also embraced is that those ideas and ideals are rooted in the very mitzvot that God commanded us, right? That's where we learn these lessons from, and that ultimately we, of course, shouldn't detach those two things from one another. But we'll get back to that in a moment. What I want to do is to kind of address what David asked about, but do mitzvot all make sense? Is there a rationale for them? And we'll get that by looking at a couple of sources where the Talmud addresses this and Rabbi Sacks addresses this very question. So I'm going to bring up the source sheet again. Okay, so this was a source we looked at already. So let's take a look here. Okay, so this is a teaching in the Talmud, and it says in Tractate Yoma the following. It says, our rabbis taught, my ordinances, the mishpatim you shall do, right? It's something that it says in Vayikra and Leviticus, right? You shall do my mishpatim, i.e. such commandments which, if they were not written in scripture, they should by right have been written, and these are they: the laws concerning idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed, robbery, and blasphemy, right? Meaning mishpatim are laws that we readily grasp their rationale, right? They're obvious. They're laws that even if the Torah didn't tell us, we probably would have formulated some kind of law like them anyway, like not killing, not stealing, and so forth. And then the verse continues, and my statutes, my chukim, you shall keep. So what are chukim? I.e., such commandments to which Satan objects, okay? And so here, the idea of the chukim are, and the way this is typically understood is, right, mitzvot which we don't understand, right? And so Satan, as it were, could say, Why are you bothering to do that? That doesn't make any sense. There's no function to that, right? And so God says, I've also given you laws of that nature as well, right? And so the question is what to make of these chukim, right? What exactly are the chukim? Are they laws that don't have a rationale, meaning that there's some metaphysical, rationale for them? Or are they mitzvot, which maybe we're just not quite sure what the reason is, but they do in fact have such a rationale, right? And if perhaps from this last video, you could already see the direction that Rabbi Sacks would take with this question. And so let's take a look at what, in fact, Rabbi Sacks writes. So this is taken from one of his great works. This is a book where he addresses why be more Jewish, not less. It's called The Letter in the Scroll. It's a beautiful book about what Judaism meant to Rabbi Sacks. And if you haven't read it, I recommend that you do. It's a beautiful, beautiful work. So let's just read a little bit from here. I tried to not take the whole quote, but it was hard to cut it down. So if anyone would like to read, please raise your hand. Great. Okay, Eddie, please do.
A letter in the scroll, pages 164 and 165. Most of the commandments fall into one of three categories. There are those loosely called mishpatim, judgments. These include all the detailed provisions of civil and criminal law, the rules of reciprocal altruism and distributive justice that make up Judaism's social legislation. Then there are chokim, statutes, such as the laws against eating milk and meat together, or wearing clothes of mixed wool and linen. These are sometimes thought of as commands that have no reason.
Right, that's exactly what we were just saying, yeah.
Rambam rightly dismisses this idea. Essentially, chukim are laws embedded in nature, and by keeping them, we respect the integrity of the natural world. Judaism's ecological imperative is a delicate balance between mastering and subduing nature, chapter 1 of Bereshit, and serving and protecting it, chapter 2 of Bereshit. So we have laws against needless waste, the destruction of species, and the despoliation and over-exploitation of the environment.
Right, so let's just pause here for a second. So when he says chukim are not laws that don't make any sense. He says the chuk are laws that have to do with the natural world. And that's, for example, not killing the mother bird and its egg, right? That's because you don't want to destroy an entire species, right? If you get rid of both generations, you've wiped out the species, right? Those kinds of laws that have to do with nature and, not mixing wool and linen and so forth, that people say, doesn't make any sense. It's a chok. It makes a lot of sense, but it's an idea that it's teaching us, right? This idea of maintaining the social order, not just mixing things together, respecting, that everything is of value. He says these are lessons that we learn from the chukim. These are ideas that chukim are transmitting to us. They're not the same kinds of things like civil and criminal law, but they're not irrational. They're just dealing with a different kind of area. And perhaps to explain the Talmud, one could claim that someone would say, what's the reason for this, right? They're less apparent than don't kill, don't steal. But that doesn't mean that they are not rational, that they still don't have a reason for it. Okay, and let's say, and there's one other type of commandment.
The other cluster of commands, known as edot or testimonies, have to do with our identity as part of a people and its story. The festivals are the supreme transformation of history into memory, from events in the distant past into a personal experience of the present. When I observe the festivals, I know more powerfully than in any other way that I am not disconnected, that I am not a disconnected atom. I am a letter in the scroll, not yet complete, written by my ancestors, whose past lives lives on in me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eddie. So the beautiful. So this final category, of course, has to do more with the holidays, things of national significance, things that are personal to us and Jewish history. And so that's kind of another category as well. But ultimately, according to Rabbi Sacks, all the mitzvot in the Torah have, a rationale, a function, a meaning behind them. And that, at no point should one kind of, do mitzvot just with a sense of it's doing something supernatural or, God just commanded and that's what's significant about it, right? But that God commanded, we're obligated to do these things, but there's meaning behind it. And what I think Rabbi Sacks would say, and what we saw in that video, is he would say that it's essential that we don't separate that meaning from our fulfillment of these laws. Because if ultimately we fulfill these laws without contemplating their meaning, then ultimately we miss the point and we lose out on the benefit that they often have. Now, we may derive some benefit from them, meaning it may be that ultimately by leaving your land fallow, it now is going to not dry up and turn into desert, but you haven't taken a lesson that you can extrapolate to other areas of conservation because you didn't relate to it as a conservationist type of mitzvah. And so what he would say is that it's so important that we don't make our mitzvot into empty rituals, but that we connect deeply with their meaning. And this idea is again rooted within something that Rambam writes. And so we're going to look at one final source before we kind of take everything back together and some questions, where we see that Rambam, how he really understands the function of mitzvot, right? We have so many mitzvot, right? What is their purpose, right? Why did God command us to do these laws?
No.
So let's see here. So this is Rambam's Mor Nevuchim, again in the third volume, the 27th teaching. Would somebody like to read this one? Yes, Grace, please, Flora. We can't hear you. Could you unmute yourself, please?
Sicha.
Yeah.
Maimonides, Mor Nevuchim 3:27. The general object of the law is twofold: the well-being of the soul and the well-being of the body. The well-being of the soul is promoted by correct opinions communicated to the people according to their capacity. Some of these opinions are therefore imparted in a plain form, others allegorically, because certain opinions are in their plain form too strong for the capacity of the common people. The well-being of the body is established by a proper management of the relations in which we live one to the other. This we can attain in two ways. First, by removing all violence from our midst. That is to say, that we do not do everyone as he pleases, desires, and is able to do, but every one of us does that which contributes towards the common welfare. Secondly, by teaching every one of us such good morals as must produce a good social state. Of these two objects, the one, the well-being of the soul, or the communication of correct opinions, comes undoubtedly first in rank, but the others, the well-being of the body, the government of the state, and the establishment of the best possible relations among men, is anterior in nature and time. The latter object is required first. It is also treated in the law, most carefully and most minutely, because the well-being of the soul can only be obtained after that of the body has been secured. For it has already been found that man has a double perfection. The first perfection is that of the body, and the second perfection is that of the soul.
Okay, thank you very much. So what he's saying over here is that ultimately the objective of a person is the development of ideas, values, attitudes, perspectives, right? That is what we are aiming to do, to kind of become more enlightened, right? More perfected beings. But in order to do that, we need to create a healthy society, right? A society which is governed based on fairness and justice. And that ultimately through those experiences, right, we become more just individuals. We get the correct views. We have a greater sense of perspective and balance in the way that we view issues, and we develop correct opinions about different matters. But that the ultimate goal are those ideals, but the only way to achieve those ideas are through these laws, are through these mitzvot. And so Rambam would say that if you take a mitzvah and you say, there's the action of the mitzvah, and there's, in a sense, the lesson, perhaps, that we learn from it, the value that we derive from it, he would say, if you do the mitzvah, you may achieve the first goal, which is you haven't stolen. But if you haven't learned the lesson, then you aren't going to achieve that higher objective, which is ultimately the perfection of the soul, of correct opinions, correct attitudes. And Rambam would say that's the ultimate purpose. Now, Rambam would say you can't get to the purpose without the mitzvah. So a person can't say, I already have all the correct views, I don't need to do the mitzvot. Rambam would reject that. Rambam would say you have to do the laws, but he would say if you only do the laws without contemplating their rationale and therefore learning a lesson from them, you ultimately are kind of getting to stage one, but not to the more important stage two. Because for Rambam, the mitzvah itself is not the objective. The mitzvah is a means to an end, right? And that end is ultimately, for Rambam, right, enlightenment, achieving a greater moral development. Ultimately, I think the way that we would maybe formulate it is the goal of life is not the mitzvot. The purpose of mitzvot is life, right? So we live a life where we learn and we have relationships and we contribute to the world. The prism through which we engage in those things is through the mitzvot. But the purpose of life isn't just to do the mitzvot. We use the mitzvot, or the purpose of the mitzvot is ultimately to live our lives. And so you could have two people, both fully observant, both keeping all the mitzvot and keeping the halacha, but their relationship to those things can be entirely different. For one person, the whole point is just doing the mitzvah. That is the beginning and end of it. For another person, that's simply the beginning. It's simply the framework to ultimately get to some place beyond that, something further. And what Rambam would say and Rabbi Sacks would say is that if you're the former, you're kind of missing the point, right? You're missing the objective, which is to ultimately grow beyond and to ultimately develop capacities and values and ways of being that then allow you to engage more broadly with the world and with ideas and with other people. And yet, if you're only doing mitzvot for the mitzvot, they become empty, they become ritualistic, they become almost pointless in nature. And that is something which I think is really important within the thought of Rabbi Sacks, because what it means is that what Rabbi Sacks was shooting for was a Judaism which was meaningful, right? Was a Judaism that had something to teach us, a Judaism that inspired us to grow, to go beyond ourselves. And the mitzvot, therefore, have to be done properly in order for them to have that function, to have that purpose, right? If a person is just focused on, did I do the mitzvah correctly? What is the details of the halacha? And it kind of, that's where it ends. Well, then it's kind of like, okay, you've done the act, but what have you ultimately gotten out of it, right? And that halacha that we started with, right, of mitzvot tzrichot kavanah, that when you do mitzvah, you have to have kavanah, that you are doing a mitzvah, that's the bare minimum, right? The objective is that when you do a mitzvah, to contemplate, what am I supposed to be learning from this mitzvah? How can I incorporate a value into who I am that perhaps will have ramification that applies in a situation where the mitzvah doesn't dictate, but I've learned the lesson that I'm now going to apply to something else. And that you could have a situation, you find this term in halakha of mnuval birshut haTorah, where you could have a person who's doing all of the legislation of the law, but is still minuval, is still a vile person, right? Where in a sense, if a person can do the laws but not learn the lessons, they can end up doing things which are still not appropriate or not in keeping with the Torah, right? It's only if a person is reflective on the lessons of the mitzvot and incorporating them, that then a person can truly fulfill what the Torah was coming to teach us. And that was at the heart of Rabbi Sacks's approach to Judaism. It was all about the meaning. It was all about the lessons. Yes, we have to follow the Torah. We have to follow the mitzvot. But the question is, why did God command us to do these things? Why did God give us a Torah? What did he want us to gain from it? And it wasn't just simply to robotically fulfill the laws. It was to learn the lessons of these laws so that we could then translate that into a better society, into lessons for building community, values that would inspire others as well. And that a person's Judaism should be rich, should be deeply inspired, where a person appreciates, look at this incredible thing God gave us that is full of such wisdom and such lessons, and that are able to teach us how to live better lives and how to live more ethical lives and how to live more, impactful lives on those around us. And the mitzvot is simply where it begins. It is definitely not where it is meant to end, right? Where it ends is going beyond the mitzvot, is where we take the lessons and we ultimately live with those lessons beyond and in other areas as well. And if a person can do mitzvot like that, that's amazing. And I think that's where Rabbi Sacks would say, is that a person needs to take a step back when doing mitzvah and think about, why am I going to do this? Now, it's something we do often when we do mitzvot, because we say a beracha, right? That's something that the rabbis instituted, where they said, before you do mitzvah, say a blessing. So you don't just do it, but before you do it, you are saying, I am about to do a mitzvah, meaning take a moment to have kavanah, to give thought to what you're going to do. Now, maybe we need a bracha before saying brachot, because sometimes we just say blessings, like blah, 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 and we're not even thinking about what the blessing is meant to teach us. But the point is, right, to use a modern term, right, we should have, real presence of mind, right? We should have mindfulness in the things that we do, so that we can be aware, I'm doing a mitzvah, and this is what I'm supposed to be learning from this mitzvah as well. And if a person can do that, then all of a sudden, something becomes, beautiful. You think of a person, using the mikveh, as a way to reconnect with the life, right? And water as it simplifies life, after having come into contact with dead or whatever it is. And all of a sudden, if you go in and you just be like, okay, I'm going to mikvah, I'm dunking, I'm out, I did what I was supposed to do. Okay, you did the mitzvah, but you didn't truly do the mitzvah of connecting with what the water represents and what it's meant to be. And, it's why some people build beautiful mikvot that have waterfalls in them, because we want people to connect with what the message, what the lesson is of that mitzvah. And you can say that of any mitzvah. When I pick up a lulav, why am I doing this? What is the lesson? What is it teaching me about nature? What is it teaching me about, the story of Jewish history? And ultimately, there's different reasons for mitzvot, and there's different symbolism. And that's what's amazing. Is the point is reflect on it, take a lesson from it, so that when you do a mitzvah, at the same time, it's also transforming who you are as well. And that was Rabbi Sacks' objective. That's why he thought Judaism was so important, because he saw that Judaism had the capacity to transform. It had the capacity to give lessons to Jews, lessons to the world that he felt the world and that we vitally needed. That Judaism wasn't simply something archaic, something in the past, a set of rituals that we did, and was just, that's what our people have always done. But no, they contained messages that were so important for us to continue to preserve and to incorporate into our lives. And it's why Rabbi Sacks, as a philosopher, was so deeply committed to Judaism, and why he felt that Judaism was so important for Jews, and ultimately had lessons that went beyond Jews as well. And it's why I think that Rabbi Sacks' legacy will live on for a very long time, because he hit the nail on the head. And I think he really came at the right moment, where Judaism shouldn't simply be about preserving Judaism, but it should be, why are we preserving Judaism? Why is it so important? What does it really have to add? And I think, so much of Jewish life post-Holocaust has been about just keeping it together. But that's almost kind of run its course, where now that's not, we've succeeded in that. So now the question is but why? What do we hope to achieve with that? I think that's where Rabbi Sacks has really come into our generation to say, let's now take it forward, right? It's not just about, maintaining it within ourselves. It's now taking our Judaism and taking it beyond ourselves as well, and having it lift us and to inspire us beyond simply doing what we're supposed to do, but really learning why we do these things. And so I hope that this has been a meaningful for you. It really was Rabbi Sacks' objective to add meaning to everything that we do, and to make it that Judaism would live, deeply in our hearts, and ultimately in the way that we lived our lives. And so I thought the best way to conclude the series was by talking about his relationship to mitzvot, and how he really saw that they were so much more, and that ultimately we had so much to learn from them, but ultimately to go beyond the mitzvah as well. Before we conclude, does anyone have any questions?
No. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. It's been wonderful studying with you. As I said at the beginning, Pesach is the festival of faith, and where we our faith was meant to be renewed. Vayaminu ba'monai Moshe Avdo. They had faith in God and Moses' servant. So I hope that everyone has a Pesach of a deep pride in their Judaism and the important lessons and faith that derive from it. And hopefully it should inspire us on the holiday, but ultimately beyond the Chag as well. And I look forward to studying with you after Pesach. We're now at the moment where if people have recommendations or things that they'd like to study, I'm open to suggestions. So feel free to private message me with any ideas that you might have, whether it's on theology, history, halakha, whatever, Talmud, whatever the case may be. And please God, we'll put something together interesting after the festival. But until then, I wish everyone a Moadim L'Simcha, a very wonderful.
Thank you.
Rabbi Morris, may I ask you one question? It's not really a question, it's just the word mitzvah, as I understand it, comes from the word to join. We join to Hashem, am I right or wrong? I'm sure Rabbi Sacks taught me that many, many years ago.
I'm not sure. Tziva normally means commandment.
Command, but it also comes a word to join. I think there's something I'm interested to know. I heard it from somebody, and that would make sense because it does join us to Hashem. It's not just the object. Sorry, slicha.
No, to join is lechaber or something.
No, I know, but I think maybe it's an Aramaic word, not the word from Siva. That's why I wanted to ask you, and not the word letzayen to mark or to distinguish. I'm sure that's something about mitzvah joining us to Hashem. It comes from one root. I mean, Rashi used to say you only need two roots, letters, for a shorish. So I'm wondering, and I just wondered if I think I got it from Rabbi Sacks many years ago.
I can tell you in the South Semitic language of Amharic, which I learned, mitzawate is to give charity. So it's
no, it's not. It's I'd like to find out, but I don't have any of my concordance or anything with me here. Yeah. Well, that was. But Rabbi Morris, something that worries me, and as a woman, and I've asked this question many times, and I asked a rabbi many years ago. When I daven, if I'm in synagogue or somewhere else, it's something different. But at home, it's abominable. And every year I say it's rush. I try to. All right, in the Amida with the Shema Kalenu and the Rafa'enu, then I spend a lot of time on that. But other than that, it's rushing. And I used to feel bad about it. And a rabbi said to me, the fact that you're actually saying your prayers is all right. And maybe it was not good advice. So I carry on rushing. So I'm asking you as a rabbi, is it such a terrible thing? It's not the true kavanah, like the Lubavitch have when they say the Sefirat HaOmer, and all the various tefillot, they have this wonderful techina before, the petition before. It's not like that. And I'm asking you, we've learned something so beautiful, and I don't want to bring it down to earth, but surely as long as you do the mitzvah, there's a value in it.
Listen, that's Rabbi Sacks himself said that. Even if you don't know the reason, do it anyway.
No, but you're not doing it well. You're not doing it well.
But the point is that even if you don't have a rationale with it, we still should do it. Yeah. But ultimately, as Rambam says, you're only doing it part the way. You're only then doing the act. You're not getting the lesson from it or the meaning.
So you've got to keep on learning.
There's an idea that we say mitoch shelo lishma balishma. From doing it for, in a sense, the wrong reason. Listen, if a person can't be more contemplative, still do it. Hopefully get to the point to be contemplative. But the point is try to get there. And maybe at different points it's easier or harder. But the point is you have to know that that's the objective. We don't do mitzvot just to do the mitzvah, right? Ultimately, we do it to learn something from it and to be changed through the process.
That's what they say, Tameh HaMitzvot, isn't it? The idea of Tameh HaMitzvot, by doing it, you begin to appreciate, understand it, and get the rationale behind it.
Wonderful. Okay, everyone, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
It was amazing, really, really wonderful. I think Rabbi Sacks must be quelling from heaven. I think he must be, really. It's really, I can't thank you enough.
Yes, thank you very much. It was great.
So nice to see you.
Really good. Thank you
so much.
Thanks.
Bye.